Hello there! So I actually decided I wanted to translate the second interview that I mentioned in the Kaito Yu magazine, the magazine that covers topics such as yokai, monsters, and ghost stories. In the previous interview video, I went over a dev interview with Komori and Masayuki Doi, and then there was a second interview in that magazine that went over some... it was an interview with two fans of the MegaTen series, an editor for the Famitsu magazine that goes by Fujikawa Q, and then a novelist that goes by Kuroshiro. And so they interviewed those two, and they talked about how they're basically old fans of the MegaTen series, and they gave their perspective on the games and their history with the games. They talked about Vengeance a little bit, so I'm going to go over that interview. As I mentioned before, some of the translations for this might be imperfect. I'm not a professional, so hopefully you'll get the basic idea of the interview though. So let's begin. This interview is called That's Why Everyone Loves MegaTen, with Shiro Kuro, who is a novelist, and Fujikawa Q, who is a Famitsu editor, and the interviewer is Miyoko Kadoya. The RPG Shin Megami Tensei, also known as the MegaTen series, continues to attract fans with its innovative storylines and one-of-a-kind worldview, right up to its latest installment, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. We spoke with two people who are huge fans of MegaTen and have been playing it for many years, novelist Kuroshiro and Famitsu editor Fujikawa Q, about their memories of the series and what makes it so appealing. So I'm going to have these side notes here occasionally when I go through the interview stuff, just in case you need to know some extra information about stuff discussed in it. So right here, that Shiro Kuro's mystery and horror themed works tend to draw influence from urban legends and Lovecraft, and he also posts novels of various genres on his website. Fujikawa starts, since the first game in the Shin Megami Tensei series was released in 1992, the series has had many titles including spin-offs, released for over 30 years. When did you start playing, Mr. Kuro? Kuro says, it was the original game, Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei. I love ghosts and monsters since way back, so I was really happy when it came out. At the time, the yokai and demons that appeared in other games were either very mainstream or completely original, so there wasn't anything as niche as this. Fujikawa says, I also learned of a lot of names of demons and monsters through that game. Another thing that excited me was the idea of summoning demons using a computer. Kuro says, I know what you mean. The American movie Evilspeak was the first to link computers and demons, but the concept of using the latest technology like a computer to summon beings from the opposite side was really cool. So I have a note here, because the actual translation I got was Devil Picture. This is the actual wording for the movie was Devil Picture. However, I could not find an American movie that goes by that name, even looking at the Japanese names for those American movies. So I'm pretty sure he's referring to Evilspeak, and I know that movie's been brought up before in relation to Megami Tensei. In fact, if you watch the trailer for Evilspeak, it will just come to you right away. If you're someone that's a fan of like SMT or Megami Tensei in general, you watch that trailer like, holy shit. That you gotta wonder how much that influenced some things in the series. Especially when it comes to summoning demons from computers in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, another, I want to mention also, I didn't put it in here, another movie I came across I haven't seen that, I think, who wrote it? It's called Demon Seed, but it's about like an AI being used to like, that wants to infuse itself into a human body to become real, like in the human world, and something about that reminded me of Digital Devil Story with Loki and the teacher. That specific thing. I haven't watched that movie, but yeah. So there are a lot of like phobia, like horror movies back in like the 80s and early 90s that I feel like definitely would have influenced the Digital Devil Story novel, and like by Aya Nishitani, and then like, you know, games afterwards. Even more games outside of Shin Megami Tensei. Fujikawa says, it was a big hit. By the way, Kuro, did you manage to get to the end? And then Kuro responds, I did. Fujikawa says, that's amazing. That's how these things are, but the system in that game was literally devilishly difficult. Back then in that time, there was no auto-mapping or the ability to save at any location. Kuro says, I remember mapping it out by hand in a notebook. There was no internet back then, so I had to rely on the bits and pieces of information in magazines and word of mouth from friends for strategies. And even now, if someone told me to do the same thing I did back then, I'd give up. Fujikawa says, yes, it's no longer possible now. Okay, I'm gonna interject here. I don't agree with that point that it's impossible, because I feel like there's been a big movement, especially in the retro gaming scene, when it comes to like YouTubers and streamers and everything, people who cover gaming content or who do Let's Plays. I've seen people go back, they want that novelty of experiencing those games without like help and like any additions to it. They want to experience like the way the game was originally meant to be experienced. So a lot of people like to get the graph paper and map out the dungeons in dungeon crawler games. Like I've even done it. Like I have like a Retron that I can put SNES games and NES games. I've got like stuff like Ultima. I did it some time ago where I'd pop the game in, I'd have the paper out, I'd like map things out. People still like the novelty of that. It's not an impossible thing. People like the challenge of doing it. So maybe it's something he didn't know that we like to do, that people like to do. They still like the mapping element of playing those games like for the first time without all the things to help them. Kuro says, maybe it was because I had no other entertainment at the time, but I had dedicated my life to conquering the game. Fujikawa says, I understand. In comparison, the latest game, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, is incredibly user-friendly. The game has become kinder and more compassionate to people, but as expected of Mr. Kuro, you're a diehard fan of the many MegaTen games, including spin-offs. Which one do you like the most? Kuro responds, actually, it's the Devil Summoner series, especially the first one, Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner. That's a detective story, isn't it? It's kind of fun to go to an apartment and get rid of the poltergeist haunting a room, or go to a TV station that's turned into another world to defeat the spirit of an idol. Or you fight various demons and yokai around the city, taking down the demon that's causing all the problems. Fujikawa responds, that worldview where everyday scenery and the bizarre are seamlessly connected, as if it were a continuation of reality, seems to have something in common with the works you write, Kuro. And Kuro says, it's true, I definitely like that kind of thing. That's why I think I really got into it. Fujikawa says, speaking of worldviews, I think the original worldview of MegaTen is very appealing. Kuro says, the first thing that struck me about that aspect was a conceptual diagram in the Megami Tensei 2 strategy guide all about Megami Tensei 2. It provided a diagram of the concepts on which the game's worldview was based, including the religious and ideological backgrounds behind the conflict between the forces of law and chaos. It was the first time I had ever come across such an idea, and it was quite the shock. And it feels somehow realistic to see the way the people in the game become divided due to ideological constraints. Fujikawa says, there's also that famous line when negotiating with Pixie, is it okay to kill demons? I was troubled when I heard that for the first time. Kuro says, that's a question addressed to all of humanity. Fujikawa says, even as a child, it became clear that there was some sort of underlying ideology, which made it stand apart from existing works at the time. Kuro says, if the only information I had was the name and graphics like other games, I probably wouldn't have put any thought into it, but knowing the background gave me the feeling that I was getting involved in something amazing. Fujikawa responds, you're absolutely right. The question of what you would do as a human caught up in the war between demons and gods is at the core of the series, and this idea became more emphasized in later Shin Megami Tensei games. Kuro says, that kind of depth was likely what drew in so many players. The protagonist gets tossed around as a figure caught between two forces. This makes you think deeply about many things. Also in a typical RPG, characters who seem like they'll become allies end up going in unexpected directions, which is characteristic of this series. Even with some you're close to, the fact that you eventually part ways feels incredibly real. Fujikawa says, I understand. It's a staple of the series where allies end up turning and killing each other. See, when I play new games, that part makes me think, it's no good. I'm gonna have to kill this guy someday. Kuro says, because the characters are so well designed, when the power of the world changes, the balance of relationships change, and it all falls apart. Moreover, the story goes on to show how things change gradually before it becomes decisive, making it more heart-wrenching. I wanted to also comment, that's a funny thing, so the Megami Tensei series includes things like the mainline series, like Shin Megami Tensei, all the spin-offs. You have Devil Summoner, Digital Devil Saga, Avatar Tuner, just stuff like that, and then, of course, Persona, right? And Persona's drastically different, I feel, than the other games, than the mainline series. So, if there's one thing that you could probably tell someone who was into Persona and wanted to know the difference, one specific difference between Persona and SMT, it would be, you don't stick with your friends and, do social links and build bonds with them, and to the end, you end up killing them. You're pretty much on your own. Like, you don't make friends, you make enemies, essentially, in SMT. It depends on which side you choose, of course. And that's, like, you know, it does... In SMT, it feels like the whole fucking world's against you, and you are pretty much on your own. And depending on, like, whose side you take, maybe you'll have allies, but pretty much your demons end up becoming your only friends. Like, it really does feel like that. Like, the humans just feel... I don't know. It's the way it be. It's kind of depressing. Fujikawa says, the chaotic forces support those who are drunk with power. On the other hand, the law of faction says very nice things. They have angels on their side, but an angel is an angel after all, so they can also feel unpleasant. Kuro says, they say things like that. Those who don't follow God's order are worthless. And then in Vengeance, the visual design of the angels are like machines. They all have the same mask-like face. It's creepy. And the demons feel far more human. Also makes you question whether what you're doing is actually the right thing as you progress. You're the main character, so you should be heading in the right direction, but you start to wonder, wait, is this really okay? Even though it's just a game, you begin to worry that you're being pushed in a difficult position, but that's what made it so great. I also wanted to say in regards to that, feeling like you don't know if you're doing the right thing. I remember on, I think it was someone who had the cutscene video for the True Neutral End in SMT5, and people were commenting on sort of like the endings of SMT5 or SMT in general, and their comment was like, no matter what I do, I always feel like I'm doing something wrong. Like, it doesn't matter what ending I pick, it doesn't matter what I do in the game, I always feel like I'm not doing the right thing. Another series that does make me feel a similar thing too, I think, is a Souls series, which, or if you want to include Bloodborne, Sekiro. Actually, I don't know if Sekiro has endings. Nah, never mind. We won't include Sekiro in that. Just Souls and Bloodborne, but those games have a lot of endings, and a lot of those endings are not pleasant. And they either do something fucky to you, you're either fucking yourself over, you're fucking other people over, you're fucking everyone over. I don't know. Someone's getting fucked in any of those endings, and so, like, it just doesn't feel... It doesn't always feel right. It was like, it just isn't good. It's bleak. Fujikawa says, now you've pointed out the symbolism of the angel design, but what about the enemy's character designs? This aspect of the game is one of the things that attracts people to the Shin Megami Tensei series. After Shin Megami Tensei 4, Masayuki Doi was in charge of character design for the SMT series. Both Kazuma Kaneko and Doi have created a number of excellent demons. At first glance, there are demons in MegaTen that look outlandish and sophisticated, but they actually follow the legends closely and add a bit of modern essence to them. For example, the head of Hecate, I don't know how to pronounce her name, is a dog, horse, and lion, just like in the legends. There are 3 heads lined up, but from the neck down, for some reason, she's wearing bondage fashion. Kaneko's sense in that area is amazing. Kuro says it's cool, isn't it? It's also incredibly well thought out. Fujikawa says, for readers of Kaito Yu, you probably know Inugami as something ordinary, but in Megaten, the design of Inugami is amazing. In most games, Inugami typically appears as a large, scary dog. It's a common trope. And Kuro says, also it can look like a priest or a monk. Fujikawa responds, that's right, but in Megaten, Inugami has a black head with a long Kudagitsune or pipe fox-like body attached to it. And on top of that, it has Taoist writing on its forehead, suggesting that he was created using a spell. So unless you understand the tradition behind how Inugami are created and how that's visualized, you can't fully understand the intent behind that design. So I had a note here from personal experience of mythology stuff. So he said, I actually knew about Inugami before being exposed to the demon in SMT and Persona, but my first exposure was the brutal method of its creation and lore associated with it in Japanese history. If you like dogs, I would probably warn you to be careful when reading about its lore. I think that's why when I saw Inugami, the head being one color and the body looking long and ghost-like to me made sense. By the way, Kudagitsune are also called pipe foxes, and they can be used as familiars and also possess people. Kuro says, you get the sense that it was made by someone who really understands it. It's fun to see how many of the original elements were included, and those elements could change with the next game, so it's fun as well. I wonder what it is, this love for strange creatures, or whatever you want to call it. Fujikawa says, it's not easy to create something like this. In Vengeance, Inugami with its fire resistance becomes a reliable demon early on. But once hit by ice magic, you'd start panicking, and suddenly you're in a pinch. Therefore, you have to consider the 5-element theory when arranging your demons, and then it feels like you're playing as an on-Myoji, or yin-yang master. Kuro says, the design of Lucifuge. Is it pronounced Lucifuge? Lucifuge? I'm gonna say Lucifuge, so correct me if I'm wrong. Lucifuge Rofocale left a strong impression on me. In MegaTen, it said that Lucifuge created the currency used by demons, Maka. I believe the inspiration for the design was probably the Lucifuge that appears in the books The Secrets of the Devil's Kingdom and the Complete Book of Demons by Arifumi Sato. In Sato's book, Lucifuge wears strange headgear with holes in the middle. It's like a round thing. I don't know if I got the proper translation for this, but it basically looks like a round thing on his head with holes in it. When I realized that the creators of the game were influenced by the same book I loved, I remember feeling a little happy. And as a side note, Arifumi Sato created a lot of books about monsters, yokai spirits, and various legends even outside of Japan back in the 80s. Fujikawa says, I understand. I also feel like there are elements of Suburaya are similar to the work of Toru Narita. Especially in later works, it becomes more apparent. There's this kind of abstract artistic vibe which I really like. Also, the original characters and settings contain some Tulu mythos-like essence. Eiji Tsuburaya is also a filmmaker that was involved in the so this is a side note here. So he's a filmmaker involved in the Godzilla and Ultraman series, if you didn't know. And then Toru Narita is a visual artist known for creating designs for the Ultraman series. Now, I'm someone that hasn't really watched Ultraman too much myself. I've seen some stuff from it and then learned things through osmosis. If you do look at some of the kaiju monster designs, you'll definitely see some Kazuma Kaneko in there, or more, you'll be like, oh, Kaneko must have gotten some influence from this. Like, if you know about Kaneko's influences, there's a lot that goes into it. A lot of his stuff, even outside of, like, kaiju and tokusatsu stuff, like Devilman and like Tezuka stuff, are things I'm actually into, so I can see those things in some of his works. And it's the same thing as Doi as well, which I'll mention again. Like, people like to try and separate the two a lot, because Doi's style definitely seems a lot different from Kaneko's, but they do share a lot of the same influences when it comes to what, like, inspired them in their art. Like, for instance, you have tokusatsu stuff, you have JoJo, Devilman, works more I want to say a lot of the adult works of Tezuka, but some of the, like, well-known series too as well. You could probably see that both Doi and Kaneko have those influences. Kuro says there's also influence from horror movies. This is clearly mentioned in the setting materials, and I find that very interesting. Fujikawa says if you dig deeper, there's no end to it. Kuro says, it's also fun to see how designs of major characters change at some point as the series progresses. And Fujikawa says, they're very diverse. There's a cute demon called Jack Frost, but each work has a variation of his appearance. In Vengeance, there's a character called Naho Biho, a Jack Frost who admires the main character as Naho Bino, and imitates him. Also, characters who may not seem cute at first can grow on you as you keep them around, and you start to feel attached to them. Yeah, I actually felt that when I played Vengeance. The Demon Haunt helps with the attachment factor, because you get to talk to your demons more. Like, even ones you really didn't care about, like even stuff like Slime and Daemon and some of the smaller ones that you get earlier on, I did start to feel like I was getting attached to them compared to some of the later demons. Kuro says, exactly, even with Slime, compared to other games, it's not good at all, it's just plain gross. Fujikawa says, even if the demon Slime says, I look forward to working with you in the future, you don't really have to be so nice to him. Kuro says, but that grossness kind of makes it cute in its own way, and you start thinking, I want to walk around with a whole bunch of these guys. Fujikawa says, I bet your party was pretty unique. I'm sure you had favorite demons every time, right? Kuro says, I did. In every game, there's always a demon that you think, I absolutely want to keep this one until the end. But the demons you get early on inevitably become less useful as the game progresses, so in the end, you usually have to swap them out. Fujikawa says, yes, exactly. In Vengeance, you can now strengthen low-level characters so you can raise them for a long time. And another thing they don't actually mention is the passives. So they have like the passive skills that come with them, like the innate abilities, like extra abilities that were added in Vengeance. That actually makes a lot of the lower-level demons still very useful to keep around. Kuro asks, does it go up to level 150? Fujikawa says, yes, it's quite a challenge to get them that far. Kuro says, I'm really looking forward to it. I'll definitely be raising Moshifu Fujikawa says, Mo Shibu, huh? Mo Shibu is cute, but she eats brains. Kuro says, but it's precisely because of that setting that they're cute. Without that setting, I'd just be some weirdo walking around with a little girl. Fujikawa says, well, those cute characters are nice, aren't they? Alice, for example, is still popular even now. But Alice isn't just cute. No matter what, she's always saying, die quickly. Or die now. Please die now. Please die for me. Kuro says, because they have personalities faithful to the original myths, you grow attached to them. You want to make them your demon companions, including their backgrounds. I only knew of one book that mentioned the name Mo Shivu, and I remember being surprised that I found it in a place like this. Fujikawa says, it's amazing how MegaTen pulls from such obscure sources, right? In the latest Vengeance game, there's the Vengeance of the Goddess chapter, where a group of female demons who call themselves the Kadishtu appear. There was some unfamiliar terms, so I looked it up, and their origin was from the Book of Radiance. I was like, from that source? And then I had a side note here. The Book of Radiance is also known as the Zilhar. It's an important text tied to Jewish mysticism, or also known as the Kabbalah. Various aspects of SMT5 and Vengeance, even outside of the Kadishtu, are pulled from those writings. Kuro says, I have the Book of Radiance too, but I thought, were they in it? Fujikawa says, Lilith. The leader of the Kadishtu is as major as they come, but the other three was so unfamiliar to me that I had to research them again. Kuro says, was Nama the first one you meet? The one who tempted someone? Some kind of demon? Fujikawa says, I think it was a story about tempting an angel and giving birth to Asmodeus. Kuro says, normally people wouldn't know about it, but being featured in the game, something that is only mentioned in 2 or 3 lines of text and documents, suddenly increases in presence, doesn't it? In the Kadishtu's design, which combines beauty, fear, and pain, it was very striking. That was a design created by Mr. Doi, right? I'm sure more people will start cosplaying it in the future. Oh, they definitely have. I'll include examples in the video. Because even, actually official cosplays too. There was an event where, I think in the US where they had some people cosplay as the Kadishtu. And then I think Atlas Korea? Like South Korea Atlas branch, there was a very professional looking cosplay of Lilith. So I enjoy. Fujikawa says, I definitely think it will increase. Also, one of the features of this work is that it has a strong Japanese mythology influence. To be honest, there have only been a handful of games that have integrated Japanese mythology elements so deeply into the story. Of course, it's not uncommon to use characters from mythology, but in Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, the game succeeds in incorporating Japanese mythology into its core, which gives necessity to the story and worldview. Kuro says that's what's interesting, right? By playing the series, my understanding of the mythology, which I had only learned in fragments, has deepened many times. Fujikawa says, I have the impression that people who like monsters and demons like to search for the original sources. Like, they're so curious that they end up researching even if they're not asked to. In the case of MegaTen, if you research it, the answer comes out, so it's kind of satisfying to have such a huge amount of information. I think it's interesting that you can have a useful experience like that, which is unique to the series. Kuro says that's absolutely true. There aren't many series that you can dive into and enjoy as much as this one. It's a game I'd recommend to anyone who shares similar interest. And that is the end of the interview. And I also want to comment on that with the mythology thing, expanding your knowledge on mythological entities mentioned in the Shin Megami Tensei series. I brought up before in the previous interview that people will theorize, when they make theories for a new game coming out or stuff teased in an upcoming game tied to the MegaTen series, they will actually go to mythology itself, like lore, and to try and see if there's anything that the game will actually pull from. And sometimes they're right about stuff, and sometimes they're wrong. It's usually it's just fun to do, though, however. I hope you guys enjoyed me going over this interview and trying to do the translation. It took me a little while. I know it's not perfect, but I hope that gets the basic idea out of the way. Also, I forgot to mention at the beginning of the video, I was mistaken, because I think before when I mentioned the second review, I may have mentioned, oh, it might have dev commentary. There was no dev commentary in this. It's just an interview with two old fans of the Megami Tensei series, just, you know, talking about things they're nostalgic about, things they like in the series, and stuff that they like about Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. So, I hope that was insightful to you, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.